Our story today is found in Joshua chapter 2, and we'll begin reading from verse 1. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. "Go, look over the land," he said, "especially Jericho." So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The context for this story is that an Israelite named Joshua is the leader of a large group of former slaves. This people have been wandering in the Sinai desert for 40 years without a permanent place of their own. But God has promised them a land they can settle in and find a home in. And so this people leave the Sinai desert and enter the land called Canaan. But they are met there with the challenges which come with moving through a land where there are other peoples, other nations and tribes, established cities, where the inhabitants certainly don't desire a foreign nation to immigrate, a bunch of ex-slaves to move into the neighborhood. Well, Jericho was the name of just such a city. It was a great and ancient city, known for its wealth, prosperity, and the might of its impenetrable walls. God has promised this land to the Israelites, and one might wonder, how on earth are this wilderness-wandering people a match for the military and structural might of Jericho? How are they going to receive this promise against such a place? Well, Joshua sends ahead of the Israelite people spies into the regions they're about to enter. And in this case, we read that he sent ahead 2 spies into the city of Jericho. And we're told that once they enter the city, they also enter the house of a prostitute and stay there. So, that's the context of our story. Now, here are 2 men, 2 spies, whom Joshua trusts enough to have the tact, the competency to go undercover and collect information. He's putting a great deal of responsibility and trust in these 2 men. The outcome of their actions will affect the whole people. And so there is no way that a nation's leader and commander would send just any 2 on such an important and delicate mission. He would have to trust them with this God-sanctioned task. But what then are these trusted men of Joshua doing staying in a prostitute's house? What are they doing there? Most people wouldn't care how competent or discreet their local pastor was. If they saw him going into a prostitute's place of work, a brothel or a strip club, it would raise some serious questions. If nothing else, they'd likely ask, what is the pastor doing there? And here are Joshua's men, staying with a prostitute. Surely, we might think, surely they could have stayed in a different place, any other place. Surely there was some other hotel or inn or back alley they could have slept in overnight while the city gates were shut till morning. This doesn't look good. It sounds like these men are up to no good. So, what are they doing there? Well, the answer to that question lies in why they were in the city to begin with. As we've established, the 2 men sent out by Joshua are spies, but they are also foreigners. These 2 men would have stood out. They would have been noticeable. In the marketplace, on the street, the way they walked, their language, the way they talked and acted, how they sounded and dressed, would have stood out to the locals. It is said that in Jamaica, the locals can spot a foreigner almost instantly, even even if the visitor may have parents or grandparents from Jamaica, there are telltale signs that scream, "You are visiting. You were not born and raised here." And if we consider that Joshua's spies were not only from a different people group, but they'd spent all their life living as nomads in the desert, I think it's safe to say that they had mannerisms and traits that screamed, "You're not from around here." And a city which had fighting men and watchtowers and a famously defensive wall would likely have some interest in security. Imagine the locals in Jericho seeing the spies walking through the streets. "They're not from around here," they whisper. "I wonder what they want. Could they be spies?" It's not hard to imagine that word might spread about these two visitors, and in fact, that's exactly what happened. Verse 2. The king of Jericho was told, "Look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land." So the king of Jericho is told, meaning some of his people definitely noticed the spies. And they even were able to identify where they came from, saying, "Some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land." The spies have been discovered. Now, if you're in a foreign land, there to spy, and your cover is blown, and there's no way out of the city, the most logical next step is to find somewhere to hide, to lay low. And where did the Israelites go? Well, they go to hide in a prostitute's house. Now, some readers may say at this point, "That wasn't very smart, was it? You sought sanctuary with a woman of ill repute. A woman who clearly has no qualms about accepting money for less than virtuous acts. Hardly a good choice to put your life in such a woman's hands." But the reality was that this place, Rahab's house, might have been the only safe place in the whole city for the men of Israel to hide. Why? Because Rahab would have had to be discreet in her line of work, where others did not have to be. In fact, her livelihood depended on it. The more discreet she is, the more clients she's likely to get. Contrary to popular belief, women of this profession were, and remain, those who are some of the most trustworthy, tactful, and judicious, the least likely to betray or pass judgment. Let's continue in verse 3. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab: "Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land." So, the king sends either messengers, but more likely soldiers, to Rahab's house with this message. Now there's something which may have stuck out as odd to some of us in this verse, and this odd thing is that the king is asking Rahab to bring out the spies. He's asking. But he's the king. This is his city. These are his soldiers. In most cases, we'd expect a king to command, to demand Rahab bring out the men at once. If not, and more likely, to simply break down her door and take them by force right away. Kings don't stand on doorsteps, hat in hand, making requests. They don't ask nicely for permission. They enter forcibly and take. Why, then, is the king of Jericho sending a request and asking Rahab to bring the men out? Verse 4. But the woman had taken the two men and hidden them. She said, Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly, you may catch up with them." Rahab tells the king's men that the spies are no longer in her house and that they should hurry up and go catch them. Notice again here that the soldiers don't enter Rahab's house. They don't say, "Move aside, we're going to check your house to make sure you're telling the truth." She says, "Go, pursue the spies," and they do. They leave. This tells us that not only does the king of Jericho trust and respect Rahab, but his men do too. Everyone in this scene seems to trust her. So much so that they take her word for it in a matter of the city's security. And of course, the Israelite spies trusted her too. Rahab is trusted by both sides. Interestingly, it seems that Rahab held the foreign men in higher regard than her own king. If not, she would have handed the men over. But instead, she hid the men. She had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. Verse 6. Now, if the spies had been found in her establishment after the king's request and her lie was exposed, what do you think would have happened to her? Well, she was helping the enemy, an enemy looking for weakness in the city in order to conquer it. This act was an act of treason. If discovered, Rahab would have been put to death. That's quite a risk this woman is taking for two foreigners. Verse 8. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brother and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death." What an extraordinary thing Rahab has just spoken. First of all, she has heard about where the Israelites have come from. She shows that she knows the story of this enslaved people in Egypt and how God delivered them. She believes the story. She believes the rumors that God opened the Red Sea for them, how He's giving them a land of their own. Secondly, she refers to the Israelites' God as God, God in heaven above and on the earth below. She's acknowledging the Israelites' God's supremacy above the gods of her own people and of her own land. Thirdly, the request she makes of them is a request for kindness, but not merely for herself. She's asking for her family, her parents, siblings, their spouses, and children. She's thinking of them and their futures and safety. Fourthly, Rahab is confident in the success of these spies, that the Israelites will overthrow the great walled city of Jericho, and she demonstrates confidence in this foreign, unseen God and His victory. Not only that, she is confident that God can save her and her family. "Our lives for your lives," the men assured her. "If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land." So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, "Go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way." Now the men had said to her, "This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house." Verse 21, "Agreed," she replied, "let it be as you say." So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. Well, the Israelite spies hide in the hills, as she suggested, and eventually return safely to Joshua, sharing the information they had gathered. Rahab, as agreed, ties the scarlet cord she let the Israelites use to climb down from her window to the outside of the city wall. She ties that cord in her window to indicate where her and her family are, a scarlet cord to signify that these were not to be harmed. Soon later, recorded in Joshua chapter 6, the Israelites finally arrive at Jericho's city gates. And when taking the city, Joshua remembers the promise given to Rahab. The very 2 young men, whom she had hidden, go into the city after Rahab and all her family and bring them all out safely. Joshua 6:23. And we're told in verse 25, Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. Quite a remarkable story. And as we read there, the story of Rahab seems to conclude with saying that she ends up living among the Israelites. A good conclusion to the tale, the end. But the story of Rahab doesn't end there. Shockingly, unexpectedly, it shows up again in the most unlikely of places. Matthew chapter 1. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. Today is the 24th of December, Christmas Eve. During the Christmas season, for those who have heard the story of the Nativity, you may well be familiar with Matthew chapter 1. The book of Matthew opens with these words, the words of a genealogy. Matthew, a disciple of Jesus, a Jewish believer, wrote his account specifically for a Jewish audience. He wished to introduce his testimony about Jesus, the Messiah, by establishing Jesus' Jewish lineage, the very authentic and reliable line that leads Jesus back to King David and back to their people's patriarch, Abraham. And so the book begins with the line, "This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham." Now, when it came to establishing historical legitimacy, when it came to record keeping and family legacy, Jewish genealogies would mainly, if not exclusively, mention men, fathers and sons. In a patriarchal society where it was sons and not daughters who inherited their father's name and inheritance, genealogies starred the male players. Who children's mothers were was considered of far less importance and often not worth recording and usually not mentioned at all. And though it is true that the genealogy recorded here in Matthew 1 does mainly contain men, fathers and who their sons were, you may have noticed a few women mentioned in the mix, and one very familiar name in particular, in verse 5. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. So, let's unpack this a bit. As we look at this list, we might ask, what is Rahab doing there? To answer that, we must first ask, who was this Salmon? Well, in the book of Numbers, chapter 1, we find another list of names, specifically a census. During the days of Moses, when the Israelites were still in the Sinai desert, God said that a census of the people was to be taken. The people of Israel were made up of 12 tribes, and God said that one man from each tribe should be chosen as its leader, its head, and be of help to Moses in his leadership role over the people. Numbers 1 verse 2, one man from each tribe, each of them the head of his family, is to help you. And we read in verse 7 who the chosen representative from the tribe of Judah was. From Judah, Nahshon, son of Amminadab. Let's remind ourselves of the line in Matthew 1:4. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon, Nahshon, the father of Salmon. So these are the same people. Numbers tells us that Salmon's father Nahshon was the leader of the tribe of Judah during the 40 years in the wilderness wandering. Now Nahshon died in the wilderness, and so it is most likely that his son Salmon would have taken his place as his heir, head of the family, and as leader of the tribe of Judah. That is who Salmon was. But then we're informed that Salmon also went on to become the husband of Rahab. He married Rahab. If you recall, Rahab, following the fall of Jericho, joins the people of Israel as a foreigner living among them, and Salmon, we're now told, ends up marrying her. Now, let's consider this for a moment. Salmon was a good Israelite man, leader of his family, leader of the tribe of Judah, trusted by Moses. He held a truly important position among the Israelites. The people would look to him for leadership, to set a moral example, for wisdom and guidance. And he marries Rahab, she who was a prostitute, she who was a foreigner. Born among the enemies of Israel, she was not an Israelite, not one of the chosen people. Imagine the scandal. Imagine the whispers. Imagine what the neighbors might say. Salmon, you can't marry such a woman. You're a leader of the people. You need to set a good example. You can't marry a former prostitute. And yet, Salmon did marry her. Now, what could this man, this leader from the princely line of Judah, possibly have seen in this woman that would make him say, "I want you as part of my family"? Rahab would not be considered good wife material by most people, not then, and arguably not in certain circles today. But let's consider for a moment Rahab's choices and actions, the things which we have read about her. What were the qualities that made Salmon conclude that she was a good choice for wife and would be a good mother? Well, we've said that Rahab was trustworthy. In Joshua 2, she was trusted by kings, leaders, foreigners, strangers, and she proved her loyalty. She kept her promises. The perfect woman for the job. Secondly, Rahab was a protector. When making a request of the spies, she thought outwardly of others. She moved to protect her family. She was others-centered, the perfect woman for the job. Thirdly, she was courageous and daring. She dared to hide foreigners at her own risk. Fourthly, she was open-minded, thinking beyond merely the city she'd grown up in, and seeing beyond the horizon to a greater narrative, the narrative of a different God and a different people. And Rahab was a woman of faith. She had not witnessed Israel's God working for herself. She had only heard stories and then trusts that he will save her. I believe we call that faith, the perfect woman for the job. When looking at this list, it becomes apparent that Rahab, although not a perfect person, actually does possess remarkable traits. In fact, she has an outstanding character of a good life partner and mother, protecting, trustworthy, doing the right thing even when it's hard. Let's consider what his decision tells us about Salmon too. It tells us that Salmon did not think he was too good for Rahab. With his actions, he was saying that Rahab was good enough for him as a wife and a partner to him and a mother to their children. Rahab had some qualities that make families work. And let us now consider the legacy passed down by Salmon and Rahab's choices. Now, if you visited us here at the house before, you may have heard our story called Ruth and Boaz. You may recall the story of Boaz, a wealthy Judean landowner who showed unexpected kindness to Ruth, who was a Moabite and a foreigner. And we looked at their love story and the remarkable choices they made. Well, as we read earlier in Matthew 1 verse 5, Salmon married Rahab, and together they had a son named Boaz. This is the very same Boaz from the Ruth story. Boaz would go on to marry Ruth. They would have a son called Obed. Obed would become the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of the King David. It seems that Boaz's parents' outlook on things might have rubbed off on him. Any child seeing these things in their family would have been shown a good thing. Second chances, treating foreigners well, respecting people, showing others dignity, humility, not having an attitude of superiority or judgment, showing grace, thinking outside the box, valuing courage and kindness. Perhaps this was a big contributing factor to why Boaz, Salmon and Rahab's son, turned out to be such a remarkable and loving man. In nearly every family line, there are individuals, characters who we might not be so eager to be associated with. People from history we might forget to mention as part of our lineage, stains on the good family name, black sheep in the family we avoid talking about, scandals and disgraces. But consider here, in this genealogy recorded by Matthew, that one of the few women highlighted in this family line is Rahab. Rahab, who was a prostitute. Rahab, who was a Gentile. She is included. She is mentioned by name as being in the family of Jesus, the Messiah. Jesus is a descendant of Rahab. In Matthew's account, there won't be any avoiding mentioning Rahab's name at the family reunions. In fact, she is a star player, a valued person. Quite strikingly, Jesus does not seem to be ashamed to be associated with this woman. He is not ashamed to be connected to Rahab or to Ruth. And Matthew makes a point of mentioning them in a list meant to establish Jesus' legitimacy as the Messiah of all things. Now, if a woman like Rahab had entered a religious gathering today, entered our family, our home, our space, I wonder what we would see when looking at her. What characteristics would we focus on? How would we treat Rahab? Would we see her as a wonderful addition to a biological or spiritual family? Would she be welcomed and celebrated, included and treated as a person? What might be whispered behind her back or said to her face? Would her name be proudly included in our gatherings? As we celebrate this Christmas season and are reminded of the birth of our Lord, may we take notice of Rahab's story. Today there may be those who have a rough past, or what might be considered a scandalous past or present. There may be some who have been labeled as black sheep. There may also be some who easily point fingers or close the door in the face of those considered unacceptable. But sometimes it's the people with the worst pasts that end up creating the best futures. Sometimes those with the worst reputations are the ones that are in fact the most trustworthy or suitable. Let us consider with new eyes the way Jesus approaches our history and those in his family. He claimed Rahab as his ancestor and part of his family, and he invites any wishing to come be part of this family. No matter a person's reputation or their past, Jesus is not ashamed to give new chances and spaces for us. He invites and celebrates people, treating them with dignity, some of whom some of us might automatically disqualify. As we close this past year and consider our choices, our journey, where we are in life, how we may feel about ourselves, maybe even what others may say about us, whether we feel like failures or successes, or how we view those around us, let us remember Rahab, the ancestor of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, son of Abraham, in whose hands every past can have a future.